On this tragedy now, we are joined by Chief of Riverside Police Department, Larry Gonzalez. Chief Gonzalez, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So we just listened to Gina's report and we heard from Michelle Blandon there, and her words really ring true for so many parents. And we think that this is one of the reasons why this story has just taken this nation by storm, because of those catfishing details. How should we all be thinking about catfishing in the wake of this tragedy?
It absolutely is tragic, and I've said this before. Our hearts really reach out to the Winnick family, not just the police department, but the entire community. And when it comes to catfishing, it's a broad category of online exploitation, and it includes sextortion, and where a child is being groomed to take sexually explicit images, or ultimately to meet face-to-face with someone for sexual purposes, or to engage in sexual conversation online, or in some instances to even sell or trade the child's sexual images. Some of the tactics that are used to entice children is engaging them in sexual conversations or role playing as one of the grooming methods, asking for a child for sexually explicit of themselves or mutually sharing images, and also developing a rapport with compliments, liking their posts or discussing shared interests and things like that.
You know, obviously you deal with a lot of really bad stories. That's part of your job. But in terms of the context of this, I mean, how do you process this story? I mean, this has got to be one of the worst. It is.
You know, it's bad enough to have a homicide, but to have a triple homicide with a kidnapping call go out, it's really all hands on deck. And it doesn't just, of course, it affects the Winnick family, of course, but it also affects the responding police officers, the fire department, which were the first ones on scene, the forensic techs that process the scene, and so on and so on. So a lot of people are affected by something of this magnitude.
You just mentioned kidnapping and that the fact that this was the call that went out. Previously, you had said that you weren't sure if this is in fact a kidnapping case. Where does it stand now?
Well, it still stands there, and I kept having to say that at the press conference. It's unfortunate, but until we can process a lot of digital evidence, it's hard for us to tell. We can see that she walked out on the Ring camera. She walked out with the suspect. But until we can find out more from, excuse me, from the digital evidence, we're not going to really know like how much dialogue, how much conversation did they have, how long had it gone for. A lot of that evidence has to come into play before we can call it a true kidnapping. However, at this point, I will say there's nothing to indicate that she's anything other than a victim until we can get that evidence.
What went through your mind when you first heard that the suspect was a former police officer?
It's I've said this before. I'm using the word disgusting, but it's heartbreaking. You know, anytime any law enforcement officer does something wrong, it really affects all of us. Something can happen in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it's going to affect all of us, even here in Riverside, California. But when you see this type of crime, it takes it to a whole different level. It's not like, hey, was this a crazy officer-involved shooting where there's questions being asked? There's a serious sickness to this person, and it makes you wonder how did they even get into this profession? And we're very proud of our police officers. I can tell you, Riverside Police Department, that we go through so much to get this job and take an oath to protect and serve. And it gets, you know, some of that, it gets destroyed when something like this happens.
Chief, we have about 30 seconds left. I'm curious, given the scope of this investigation, how long do you expect this to take until we really get some concrete answers?
Good question. It's going to be a lengthy investigation. And unfortunately, when you come to digital investigations, when we try to find out, I got asked a lot about the social media platforms. If it was a social media platform, was it a gaming platform? For us to get that information, there's to be search warrants that are developed, and possibly different search warrants for every single app, depending on if one of the apps owns the other app. But and then on top of that, to go through all that evidence, all that context, like I said, possibly photos, videos, whatever it is, it'll take a while to unravel.